Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing a case that has been dubbed by the media as the Henryetta House of Horrors. And in looking into this case, in learning about what was found, the 6 victims that were killed here, and all the evidence that was inside that house, it makes absolute sense to me why this case received that name. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that once you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now let's go ahead and get into this video. This video was on a case that was recommended to me by a member of the Brat Pack named Monroe. Hi Monroe, thank you Monroe. And for anybody who's curious how to leave a case suggestion, because I do see comments with people asking that, you just leave a comment down below. That's where I pick my cases from. Like the case I'm going to cover, unless it's one that I stumble upon myself, that's where I choose from, is in the comments. But anyways, this is a case that I was familiar with though. It's one that I've been familiar with since it first happened back in 2023. And it's one that I watched and was just like shocked at how tragic it was and how completely avoidable it was, because there were so many systems in place that failed, and due to their failures it made it possible for the person that committed these murders to be out on the street to commit them in the first place. Jesse McFadden, the multiple murderer in this case, was a man, if you can call him that the state knew to be dangerous. They had evidence that proved what a monster he was. Still, they released him from jail 3 years earlier, where he was being held for another violent crime that he committed, and he went on to commit 6 murders. 6 innocent people were killed, 5 of which were children, and then he took his own life. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case, but of course I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this: do you believe that there are other victims linked to Jesse McFadden? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murders of Holly McFadden, which was Jesse's wife, Rylee Allen, which was Holly's oldest daughter, Michael Mayo, which was Holly's son, Tiffany Guess, which was Holly's youngest child, Brittany Brewer, which was Tiffany's friend, and Ivy Webster, who was also Tiffany's friend, her best friend. So our story today is going to begin with an Amber Alert, and this Amber Alert was issued on May 1st, 2023, and this was in the area of Henryetta, which is a town in Oklahoma, very small place with less than 6,000 people. It's about an hour away from Tulsa. Now this Amber Alert was issued because 2 girls, this was 15-year-old Brittany Brewer and 14-year-old Ivy Webster, they were missing, and they were last known to be in the company of 39-year-old Jesse McFadden. Basically, Brittany and Ivy were friends, very close friends, with Ivy being best friends with Tiffany, who was Jesse McFadden's 13-year-old stepdaughter. No, not stepdaughter. Yeah, stepdaughter by marriage. He married into the family. He was her stepdad. And so basically, these girls were really good friends with Tiffany, so they had gone over to her house for a slumber party, which was something that had happened many times before. It was totally routine in their little friendship. But the thing that was weird this time is that they hadn't come home and they were totally unreachable. So the Amber Alert had been put out at about 10:30 that morning. Soon thereafter, a search warrant was issued for the property where Jesse McFadden lived, but that wasn't going to be the only warrant that was, issued that day, because there was also a bench warrant put out for Jesse McFadden because he had missed a court date that he was supposed to go to that very morning, because he had been arrested and was out on bail awaiting trial. This was going to be that trial for, let's just say, inappropriate contact with a minor girl, which we're going to get into more fully. Don't you worry about that. But you look at this picture, these 2 teenage girls being missing. They were last seen with Jesse. Jesse, who is supposed to go to court for being inappropriate with a young girl, is also missing, and things are not looking good. And sadly, it would only get worse from there, because once police were able to execute their search warrant and they entered the home where Jesse McFadden lived with his wife and his 3 stepchildren, they were walking into just it's hard to even describe. If you know, you know, and if you don't, you're going to find out. We're going to get into it. But it was clearly invented by a very depraved man. And within no time, they also found in searching the property that there were 6 bodies on the property. The bodies of the 5 people who had been in that house, the family, and the 2 girls who were there just for a slumber party. And of course, the body of Jesse himself, because he had taken his own life. Now, this case is very complicated. I'll tell you that. In learning about it, I was like, where do I even start? Like, where do I even start? Because there's going to be so much that we're going to talk about here. But in this particular case, I'm actually going to start with talking about Jesse, which I don't usually do. I don't usually start with like the killer. I usually start with talking about the victims. But in this particular case, I feel like we need to talk about Jesse because who he was and what went on in his life and his experience in the court system, I feel is very relevant in understanding why it's just so horrific and concerning that he was even out on the streets able to do what he did here. But don't worry, we're obviously we're gonna talk about the victims. We're gonna talk about everything. I feel like this is gonna be a long one. Now, from the information we have that's available, it seems that Jesse McFadden had always been a bad egg. There isn't a ton of information that's been released about his childhood, though I do know that he was said to have been born in Kansas and he dropped out of school in the 9th grade, so he didn't have a ton of education. And he just started getting into trouble with the law pretty early, before at least his 21st birthday, because his first run-in with the police was when he got in trouble for having beer on him as an underage person, so he wasn't 21 yet. He was also arrested at some point for stealing like a ridiculously large amount of money from his grandfather. Reports say that he stole like $80,000 from his grandfather, and he also had at least 2 charges for driving with a suspended license, which all of that is not good, but that's not the only things he had against him, because he also had a record that showed that he was a violent and disgusting piece of shit. So what happened here, the big thing that we're going to talk about, the thing that made it so he should have been in jail at the time he committed the murders that he committed, is that in 2003, when he was 21 years old, he had been at a party with some friends, his girlfriend at the time, who, strangely enough, I believe was named Holly, the same as his wife, though not the same Holly. They were just both named Holly. And he had been in a party with her and some of her friends. And one of these friends was a 16-year-old girl named Crystal. Now, Crystal didn't know him well. They'd seen each other, but he, to her, was just her friend's boyfriend. So they went, they partied, and they parted ways, with Crystal actually getting a ride home from one of her friends that evening, leaving her car at the party, I assume, because she was intoxicated, right? I mean, she was 16, but it was also a party. And like, I've been 16 at a party before, and I can't think of another reason she would have left her car. So she leaves it. She goes home. I don't know where her parents were, but they weren't home at this time. And she was expecting to have a totally normal night, but ended up having anything but that. That's because not long after getting home, she hears a knock on the door. And when she opens the door, she sees that this guy, her friend's boyfriend, Jesse, is there. And he's seemingly upset. He's telling her that like him and his girlfriend broke up and he needs a place to stay. Now, this was a very surprising situation for her for a couple of reasons. One, like, why is he here? I barely know him. And 2, how did he even know I was home? Because my car isn't even out front. She later found out that there were people she knew that drove by and thought about stopping by, but thought she wasn't home, so they didn't, which if only they had, right? Like, we might be in a different situation here, but also like, how did he know she was here? Did he follow her? It just seemed very, very strange. But anyways, he's here. He's telling her he needs a place to stay. And she's like, sorry, that really sucks, but like, you can't stay here. And she tries to close the door and bid him adieu. But he pushes himself in the door and attacks Crystal at knife point. Like, he literally held a knife to her throat because she's screaming, right? She's screaming her head off, and he's telling her that if she doesn't shut up, he's going to kill her. He then takes her and he ties her to her own bed with like items he found around the house, like bungee cords and belts, things like that. Ties her legs and her arms to the bedpost of her bed, cuts her clothes off, and rapes her. It was so bad that afterwards, and when she went to the doctor and, was checked out, she was told that she might not even be able to have kids. Now, thankfully she was, but this is what she was told at the time. That's how violent this was. Now, after the deed was done, Jesse seemed to be stressed out. He was pacing around the room. He was freaking out. And Crystal went into self-preservation mode, okay? She went into survival mode. And she's telling him, like, don't worry, calm down. Everything's fine. I'm not going to tell anybody. You just got to calm yourself down. And he was like, okay, this is great, but we got to get rid of the evidence here. And she's like, you know what? You do what you got to do. Now, amazingly, this worked. She was able to calm him down enough to get him to actually leave her, and leave her, I was going to say fine, but not fine, alive. Okay. Alive. And once he left, the first thing she did is she actually got the phone and she called her best friend, which is so, I don't know. I feel that very strongly, but shortly, like immediately after calling her best friend, she called the police. So police came, they found out what happened, and they quickly found and arrested Jesse McFadden, who was actually just about a mile away at the Canadian River and had apparently tried to take his own life after doing what he did. Now, this whole situation, as I am sure you can imagine, greatly affected Crystal. Like prior to this, she never had a sense of danger with people. She never felt like she needed to be on guard because she was 16 years old. You know what I mean? She was an invincible child. But now she saw that the world could be so dark. And what was most alarming to her is when she looked back, she could never remember seeing any red flags with him. So there was nothing to like watch out for and worry about in the first place. Which I do have to wonder. I really wonder if he had red flags for other people, like people who were closer to him, who saw him as a kid growing up, especially considering how both he and his brother turned out. Because let me tell you, neither of these two guys seem like peaches. Like his younger brother has a bunch of charges against him, from drugs to assault, battery, arson, cruelty to animals, and most notably, in 2022, he locked an ex-girlfriend in a dog cage for a full day and tortured her for hours. He beat her bloody with a stick and electrocuted her with jumper cables, okay, during this time that he had her in captivity. And luckily, eventually, she was able to escape. The cops came. There was a standoff with police where he burned his own house down, and he was arrested. Thankfully, he was arrested for this. But when I hear this and I see what Jesse did, I'm just like, what the fuck happened to these kids? It just seems very coincidental that both of them would have such serious problems. But let's go back to Jesse and let's go back to Crystal. So for what Jesse did to Crystal, he ended up taking an Alford plea, which we have talked about before. It's basically where a person is saying like, hey, I'm innocent, but you have enough against me that if we go to trial, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be found guilty. We talked about this in another case I covered, actually more than one, but the one that comes to mind right now is Kiona Braxton, if you recall, which if you haven't seen that video, you should watch it. It's fucking crazy. But basically, Jesse ends up taking this plea. He's convicted. And though the prosecution was asking for 25 years, he was given 20 years in prison for this crime. He went to jail. He worked at a call center. He served not enough time and then was released early on good behavior in 2020. Early, man. A very dangerous man who never should have been let out early. Never should have had that opportunity. And we will get into why that is, the new things that came out about him while he was in jail. But let's put all that new information aside and let's talk about just what he did to Crystal. That's horrifying. Anyone who can be that violent and that disgusting towards another human being, I have a very hard time thinking people who commit those types of crimes, sexually motivated crimes specifically, can be rehabilitated, to be honest with you. And it's not like this was a one-off for him either. This was just the first time he had been caught, because after this happened with Crystal and it came out and people learned that he had done this to her and his name had been released, Crystal was reached out to by another girl, another victim of Jesse's, who told her that he had sexually assaulted her on a school bus when she was just in the 6th grade, and that she had never come forward because Jesse had told her that if she told anybody what happened, he would kill her, which is horrifying. So if this is true, he did this and he clearly didn't feel bad about it because he went on to then go ahead and do it to Crystal as well. You know what I mean? And then he clearly didn't learn or feel bad about what he did to Crystal because just after 11 months of being in jail, he had the audacity to try to get his sentence reduced, telling the judge that he just wanted the opportunity to become a better man. He said that he planned to learn a trade in prison to make himself useful to society. He said that he'd go to rehab, and he said that he wished he could take a sex offenders class because he just wanted to be better. He basically said that no matter how much he wanted to, he could not change the past. And in a letter to the judge, he said specifically, and I quote, "I know what I done was a horrible thing to do to another person. I can't begin to understand how I've changed the victim's life or how I've made her family feel. I feel very bad for what I've done. It's something that I think about every day. I sit and think about how I can change what I've done. But no matter how much I'd like to, there's no change in the past. So the future is all that's left to me. Really sad for him. Truly. Now, the judge in this case was like, I'm so affected by what you've said, but that's going to be a no from me, dog. And Jesse was kept in jail and got into a little trouble here and there for various different things. There was a former cellmate of Jesse's who came out after the murders took place and was able to give a little bit of insight into who Jesse was in prison. Okay, this old cellmate, his name was James, and he was in jail for burglary at the same time that Jesse was in for the attack on Crystal. And he said when the two met, he seemed like a totally normal guy, but as they got to know each other more fully, that opinion of him changed because they were cellmates for, I believe, 1.5 years. And he said the longer they were around each other, Jesse and his whole demeanor screamed predator and sexual predator, specifically with every conversation they had turning into something sexual. He said that he'd seen Jesse sort of stalking nurses in the medical facility, that he made women in the call center feel uncomfortable, like he would purposely brush up against them just to see what he could get away with. And just overall, he said that Jesse was a creepy fuck towards women. He said that with time, Jesse did tell him what he was in for, but of course he played it down a little bit and made it not so serious. But once James learned what Jesse was in jail for, he said that all of the things about Jesse that he saw as red flags made much more sense, and that he could tell that Jesse was a dangerous man. He even said, and this was like, okay, he said that if he himself was a more physically or mentally weak person, he thinks that Jesse would have sexually assaulted and abused him in prison by either manipulation or force. He was so affected by Jesse in the short amount of time that he had been in contact with him when they were in jail together, that when he got out of jail himself, he looked Jesse up and he contacted the police about him. Now, when he did this, the police recommended that he, look up on the database, right? The state database. And when he looked Jesse up in the state database, he didn't come up at all, which is very odd considering his history, right? But he, looked him up, didn't find him, reached out to police and was like, hey, this guy's very dangerous. He's not coming up in your database. He is a multiple offender and he's going to offend again. And the police just didn't respond to him. And another thing that's interesting about James specifically and his relationship when it came to Jesse is that in a strange turn of events, he and Holly, Jesse's wife, like future wife, were pen pals while he was in jail. Now, how they got to know each other, I don't know. I don't know if they knew each other independently, or maybe Jesse, who was friends with James, knew that he was lonely and asked, Holly to write him. I can't say for sure, but he knew Holly from, being pen pals. So when he got out of jail, he looks Holly up. He sees her last name has changed, so she's now married to Jesse, and he reaches out to her and talks to her a little bit, and he thinks about telling her how Jesse was, the type of guy he was in prison, what he did to get in prison in case she didn't know the specifics of it, and he decided against it. He was worried that if he was to write this stuff to Holly, that Jesse might find out about it and he may retaliate, so he chose not to do it. Now, would it have mattered? Would it have made a difference? It's hard to say. It's just eerie to think that somebody could have stepped in and didn't hear. But this is all the stuff that, James has said. This is all things from his point of view. He seemed trustworthy to me, but it's hard to say if somebody's being honest. So those are his accounts of what happened with Jesse while he was in prison. But there were things that were on record and in Jesse's file of things that he did wrong while he was in prison that can actually be proved because they were recorded. Not like recorded on video or audio, but like recorded, written down on papers and put into his file. He had offenses on his record for things like tobacco possession, THC being in his blood, leaving his cell during a lockdown, sexual activity, battery of another person, and most notably, getting a cell phone while in prison somehow, and using that to talk to and request nudes from a minor, which again is horrifying. And this wasn't even the first time he got a cell phone either. He was actually caught with a cell phone when he wasn't supposed to have it in 2013, after he got caught talking to a woman who said she had been texting with him for 3 months. Then later, he gets caught again with a cell phone, this time talking to and requesting photos from a minor. So now is where we're going to get into talking about why Jesse McFadden shouldn't have been out on the street to be available to commit the murders that he committed in the first place. Because remember, he was released from jail on good behavior. But these are things he did while in prison. So where's the good behavior? Is the good behavior in the room with us? Because I'm not seeing it. Okay, so this girl, the minor that Jesse was talking to, was a girl named Caitlin. When she was 15 years old, she was given a phone, I think for her birthday. It doesn't really matter. She was given a phone. And within a short amount of time after getting that phone, she receives a text message. And this was from Jesse McFadden while he was in prison. She doesn't know how he got her number. Her suspicion is that whoever had this phone before him had some numbers that were programmed into the phone, that her number was programmed into the phone, and whoever owned that phone number before her may have known the prisoner before that. So she believes Jesse gets a hold of his phone and just starts texting whatever numbers are in the phone, just hoping to get someone to talk to. And the person that he happened to get was a teenage girl, a fact he was very aware of. She told him her age. Their very first conversation, she told him her age, and even went as far as sending him proof of her age, which is something he requested. She sent him a photo of her permit, which showed that she was 16. So she was 15 when she got the phone, 16 at the time when they are talking, and she's sending him proof of her age. So from there, from the two talking, a relationship starts, if that's what you want to call it. He groomed her is basically what happened here. He groomed her, and it went from, casual conversation to quickly, can you send me topless photos, to let's see just how much we can do for each other without actually being together. Now, this communication between the two of them only ended up stopping when I guess her grandpa found out that they were talking. He found out that they had been texting. He found out that she was planning to see him when he got out of jail. He freaks out. Him and her grandma, they freak out, and they contact the police. Now, because of this, because her grandparents reported this, Jesse ended up getting additional charges added to him, right? These were charges for soliciting sexual conduct from a minor and possession of inappropriate photos of an underage girl. But he was not given any additional time. He was instead actually released from prison early for the rape charge he was in there for after serving 85% of his sentence, as he was required to. But he was released while those new charges were still pending against him. So they're like, I know that you have this going on, but you served 85% and you were a good guy, so you can go. So he literally had these felony charges against him for sexting with a minor and having photos of this girl, but was still released early. It's absolutely insane to me. And him getting these new charges against him that were, pending against him when he was released didn't stop him from having this relationship with this girl either. It continued, the calls, the letters, all of it, for a year and a half. Okay, a year and a half after he got caught for it. He did not learn his lesson. He continued to do this. It got to the point that he convinced her to drive to the courthouse that was 2 hours away from her grandparents' house to ask them to drop the charges. But of course they wouldn't. But he was just keeping her around and manipulating her, hoping he could use her to get him in less trouble. Now, in time, as she got older, she did put a stop to it. She said that she actually dropped out of high school, moved away from her grandparents' house, and stopped talking to Jesse. And it's at that point that he started threatening her. He would reach out to her and threaten her because she had stopped talking to him, and also there were charges against him that were related to her. And she said that with that time, that age, that perspective, she started to see just how groomed and manipulated she was. So she agreed to testify against him at her hearing, at the hearing for, what happened with her and Jesse. She said of this quote, "I realized he didn't love me. He was sick. It was all made up." She said that she felt like she had to testify against him because she thought she was protecting people, stopping him from hurting other people. And she added specifically, quote, "He took away my innocence, my childhood. I didn't want him to do that to anyone ever again." Yet he was released on good behavior, even though we know he did not have good behavior. So the question is this: why was he released early? Why didn't they hold him in jail for his entire sentence, the 20 years for the rape charge, and then continue holding him without bond for the new charges he had, the new felony charges against another child? This is the question I have, and this is a question a lot of people had. And the answer that we got from officials was, quote, "We cannot hold someone in prison for a crime they are not convicted of. We investigate what happens within our facilities, and then we turn it over to the proper authorities to file the charges. The DOC themselves cannot do that. Which is, I'm sure you can imagine, that statement was not sufficient for many people. They were like, this is not how this should be. And one Tulsa-based defense attorney, I believe his name, wait, it's going to come to me, I think it was Lee Berlin. He said that he was shocked to hear that Jesse got out pending these charges that were against him, and said specifically of this quote, "I'm a sex crime defense attorney. This is all I do all day, every day." And I'm like, how the hell does this happen? But it did. So he was released after serving 16 years and 9 months. And he would go on to be rearrested. He was rearrested once these new charges had, gone through the system. And I think it was in November of 2020. He was rearrested and he was held on a $25,000 bond, but he did post this bond a week after being arrested. So he was out and he was free while he was awaiting trial. He was free while he was awaiting trial. And he pled not guilty, obviously. And he was basically, his argument was going to be that it wasn't him. Okay. He was pulling a Shaggy straight up. And so it was like, it wasn't me. I wasn't the one talking to Caitlin. It was somebody else who was in the jail that was talking to her. Innocent here. Now, something shitty about this case, specifically with Caitlin, and this case as a whole, because this whole case is so shitty, is that the trial that was supposed to happen for what Jesse did to Caitlin was put off over and over. It kept getting continued and pushed out due to deaths and foot injuries and COVID. 2020, the COVID of it all really put delays in this case. And because of that, even though this happened in 2016, the trial wasn't going to take place until 2023. Specifically, May 1st, 2023, the day the bodies were found in Henryetta. Now, while Jesse was out awaiting trial for all of those years, he did have some things that he had to do. When prisoners are released, they do have some stipulations. For example, he was supposed to register as a sex offender, and he needed to check in every 90 days with the sheriff's office. Great. But he was not given any probation. And in all those years, he was only given one home compliance check. And these home compliance checks were to make sure that the check-ins that he did every 90 days, which he didn't even have to go in person for, by the way, were legit, and to make sure he wasn't doing anything that he shouldn't be doing. And they only went one time because they're not mandatory. They're up to the discretion of local law enforcement. And what we're going to learn in this case is that local law enforcement here, how do I say this politely? Sucked a bag of dicks. I calls it how I sees it. So he's out in the world just existing, getting to live his best life while he's awaiting this trial. And while he's out in the world, he meets Rylee Guess, a young single mother from Texas, and the two hit it off, fall in love, and get married. They get married in a courthouse wedding at the Okmulgee, Okmulgee, Oklahoma courthouse. They get married there. And they don't even tell anybody. They don't tell anybody for months until Christmas Eve of 2022 when they throw a wedding party and tell everybody like, hello, look at us. We are married. With that, the new family of 5, Jesse, Holly, and her 3 kids, Michael, Rylee, and Tiffany, all moved in together in this nice little house on this big property in Henryetta, Oklahoma. Now, according to Holly's family, she had no idea just how dangerous Jesse actually was. There are people who do not believe that and people who villainize her, but even to this day, it's been over a year at this point, I haven't seen anything released that shows that she had any idea of what was going on with him specifically. All I have seen are accounts from those who knew her that said that she was a great mother, a mother that loved her children beyond belief. She was said to be overprotective and supportive and close with her kids. Her mother, Jeanette, said that Holly was like the embodiment of the best mother, always going above and beyond to make her kids feel loved and supported and included. Like, for example, when Michael wanted to play football, she, quote, went out 100%, went and bought the family t-shirts and sweatshirts to support the team. Her mother, Jeanette, says that she just does not understand how Holly was taken with a man like Jesse. She said that she could tell he was not a good person. He wasn't a good partner. He wasn't a good stepdad, that he manipulated and controlled everything that Holly and her kids did. And from the way people describe it, it does sound like she was emotionally abused by him. Like, he was the type of person who would put her down and who had to know where she was at all times and would track her cell phone. And if the kids were out, like with anybody that wasn't him, like with their grandmother, for example, he tracked their phones too and had to know what they were doing at all times. And this isn't something that just Janet, Holly's mother, said. There's this guy who we're going to talk about a lot in this video. His name is Justin. He was Ivy Webster's father, or he is Ivy Webster's father, Ivy being one of the girls who was killed here. And he said of the way Jesse McFadden was when it came to these kids and tracking them, quote, "I would say he was weird. He was always getting into his kids' phones and reading their snap messages and all that. It wasn't in a way of a concerned parent. It was more of keeping tabs on the kids." Now, Holly's mother did say that she had found out about Jesse's prior charges before the murders happened, and that she had gone to Holly with this information. But by this time, it sounds like Holly was already pretty brainwashed, because her mother tells her about the situation and she says, "Oh yes, I know he was arrested for this, but it was all a big misunderstanding." And that's because this is what Jesse was telling her, that it was something that wasn't as bad as it was and it got blown out of proportion. And you would think, like, why would you believe that? But she ended up getting a sort of confirmation when Crystal reached out to her. You know, Crystal, the girl who had been 16 years old when she was violently raped by Jesse to the point that she may not be able to have kids. Well, this Crystal reached out to her. And if you're not watching and you're just listening to me, Crystal is in quotes. This wasn't Crystal who did this, but this Crystal reaches out to Holly and tells her, like, "Don't worry about Jesse. This was all blown out of proportion. He and I were actually dating when this happened. We got into a fight. Police followed through with these charges when I didn't want them to. And I wasn't even 16. I was 19. So this was an innocent guy who got railroaded, essentially." This is what Crystal is telling Holly, which lines up to what Jesse was telling Holly. Now, Shyamalan twist. You're going to be completely surprised here. This wasn't Crystal. This was a freaking person that Jesse had hired, had paid money to send these messages to Holly and pretend to be Crystal from a Facebook page that he had created in order to make it seem like he wasn't such a bad guy, so Holly would be with him. Now, I don't know why anyone would ever do this. Like the girl, the woman, the person who sent these messages for him. I'll never understand why a person would do this, especially because, like, you're reading the messages that you're sending. Okay, so you know that you're helping cover up for somebody doing something horrible, and yet you still do it. And I don't get it, but we've seen it happen before, like in the case that I covered, Molly McLaren, where she had blocked her ex on all of the devices, you know, and then he got some girl to befriend her and follow her and like follow her on social media so that she could stalk her for this guy, eventually giving him the location to where she was so he could kill her. Like, we know that this happens. I don't understand why it happens, and I think it's gross. Let's be better, just overall. Now, I guess this woman did hear about what happened to Holly and hear about what happened to the kids, and actually did reach out to her family, admitted to what she did and apologized, which is something to do, but I still think it's gross. If you are watching, I hope you learned. Let's just say that. I hope you learned your lesson. So anyways, Holly's mom hears about what Jesse had been in jail for, reaches out to Holly, and she's like, I know, but it's complicated. And Jeanette said of this quote, "He lied to my daughter and convinced her it was all a huge mistake. He was very demure. He was very standoffish, generally very quiet, but he kept my daughter and kids basically under lock and key." Now, to me, this sounds like the classic controlling relationship that we have heard about so many times before. He gets with her. He brainwashes her. He alienates her from her family who doesn't approve of the two of them. He physically moves her 2 hours away from her family and gets it to the point that she doesn't talk to them and she only trusts him and doesn't trust anything anyone else says. Now, I got to be honest, I don't know what I would do in this situation. I'm lucky enough that I'm not in this situation, but in everything I've read, I can understand to a point why she would think that Jesse, what he did wasn't as bad as it was, right? Like, Jesse tells her it was a whole misunderstanding. Crystal tells her it was a whole misunderstanding. And Jesse didn't have restrictions, right? He's out of jail. He doesn't have to go anywhere. He doesn't have a probation officer. He doesn't have a parole officer. He doesn't have to go and check in with people. He isn't on the Oklahoma registry. Like, when you look him up, he's not on there. He is allowed to go to schools, right? He goes to sporting events for all the kids. It doesn't seem like he's being monitored, and you think if he did something so horrible, he would. So in her mind, she's like, I guess it's not that bad. She either didn't know or she didn't think it was that bad, because Tiffany's dad, who we'll talk about a little bit here, I believe his name was Joe. I'll check my notes in a little bit, but Tiffany's dad had asked her about Jesse, not about Jesse specifically, because they just had a rule between the two of them that they wouldn't let anybody with like records be around the kids. And when he asked about Jesse, Holly told him that Jesse was clear. His name was Joe. I just checked. And he said that if he had known that Jesse had a record, Tiffany would not have been there. And he said specifically, if he had known what Jesse's record was, Jesse would not have been there. He said he would have brought in every officer in the state over to remove him from that house. And if that didn't work, he would have gone and taken him from this house by his neck himself. And I feel so bad for this guy, because he lost all these kids. Like, yes, he was Tiffany's biological dad, but he was the guy. Okay, he was their dad. He's the one who was in their lives. He's the one who married Holly and built a life with her. And he's the one that the kids referred to as dad, and who had been there in their lives since they were like little kids and little babies. And even after him and Holly separated, he was still the one, even though she was remarried to Jesse, who was talking with her and intending to adopt these kids and have them be his kids. So he lost all of his kids in one fell swoop. And I saw an interview with him. I think him and his dad, there was some other guy with him, but you can tell he's gutted. And man, it just should not have happened. So many people have talked about the fact that it should not have happened and all the reasons why it should not have happened, but it did. It did happen. So now let's get into that. Let's get into what happened in that house. It was the last weekend of April 2023, and Tiffany Guess, the youngest daughter in the household, was going to be having a slumber party with her friends, which was a totally normal thing, something that happened all the time. These girls, specifically Ivy, were at the house all the time, or Tiffany was with Ivy all the time. And I read online that the Friday before there had been no school. Now, I don't know if that was true. I wasn't able to confirm that there wasn't school. And I went online and I looked at like the April 2023 calendar and looked at like the holidays that were there, the holidays that took place in April of 2023. And the only one that was applicable was World Rat Day, because Jesse McFadden is a fucking rat. But anyways, Tiffany was going to have friends over that night. They were going to spend the night. They were going to go to the mall. They were going to go to this family entertainment center called the Main Event. It was going to be a totally normal time, totally normal thing for teenage girls to do. Slumber parties, going to the mall. That's literally what I did when I was that age. And though Tiffany did invite 4 friends over that night, which people believe this was at Jesse's urging or suggestion, only 2 girls were able to come. And this was Tiffany's friend Brittany and Tiffany's best friend Ivy. Now, Ivy and Tiffany, Holly's daughter, were best friends. They had been best friends for about a year, ever since Ivy and her family had moved to the area from Texas, which sounds to me like something that she and Tiffany could have bonded over, since Tiffany and her family, or at least Tiffany's mother. Now I wonder if the whole family was from Texas. There was a Texas thing that the two had in common. That much I can say for sure. And in typical teenage girl fashion, these two became immediate, inseparable best friends. And the families were close also, not just like socially, but also in proximity, with them being just like a mile to a mile and a half away from each other. So the girls were always together at one or the other's house at like all times. Like, for example, shortly before the girls' deaths, Ivy's family was telling Tiffany that they were going to get her a key to their house because she was there so often, she might as well just have her own key, because the girls, again, were connected at the hip. Now, even though the girls were close, the parents knew each other, right? But they weren't super close, specifically with Jesse. They would see him around, like they would see him when they were with the kids. They would see him at drop-offs and pickups, like, and if Jesse was coming to drop off the kids, he would come inside and have, a chat about work or a chat about Holly, like small talk, but they weren't close. Now, Ivy's dad said that he didn't know him well, but he saw him often and he didn't get any bad vibes from him. No malicious vibes, nothing that made him look at him weird. He just saw him as a normal guy. And this is what Brittany's father has said as well, that anytime he saw Jesse, he just saw him as like a normal guy with no red flags. Justin, Ivy's dad, has said that maybe he was a little socially awkward and weird, but in hindsight, he's this guy was literally a devil in disguise that was very, very good and hiding who he really was. Now, when it came to the slumber party, the weekend of the slumber party, I can't say what sort of communication Brittany was having with her family. I haven't seen as much reporting and as many interviews with her family as I have with Ivy's family, for example. But I do know that when it came to Ivy's family, her mother and she had been talking like pretty much the entire time that she was gone. They were talking on Snapchat. I guess they talked on Snapchat all the time. They were talking all through Saturday into Sunday night, and everything seemed normal until Sunday. Ivy's mom did speak to Ivy on Sunday, and at the time, nothing seemed weird, but in hindsight, it does. And she's not even sure if who she was talking to was her daughter, because it wasn't like voice or anything. It was a text. And it was weird in hindsight because it was just a very direct text. There wasn't any I love you. There wasn't any like warmth. Like she knows how her daughter texts, but she gets this text from Ivy that says that she and the other girls are going to be going to the McAllister property, which was a property that Jesse's family owned that the girls had been to before. They'd usually go out there and they'd go swimming. And the thing that was weird about this is that Ivy just told her mom she was going. She didn't ask her if she could go. She didn't, warm up to her and be like, Mom, nothing. She just like, this is where we're going. Cool, thanks. And her mom just knew that it was a little bit weird, but didn't think much of it at the time and just expected that her daughter would be home by 5. Now, around the time that the girls were supposedly supposed to be coming home, Ivy's family actually received a phone call. And this was a phone call from Jesse. Jesse was telling them that they were still out at the property, the McAllister property. He was working on a fence or something like that. And that there was really bad service. And that's why they weren't hearing from the girls, that he himself had to walk super far away from the house to even be able to make this phone call. And so it was going to be taking a bit longer. And the families at this point believed that when he made this call, the girls were not even alive. Because the truth is, they never even went to this McAllister property. This is just a lie that he was telling, which is another reason why they don't think they were talking to Ivy, because they didn't even go to this place. Now, even though that's what they think now, that the girls weren't alive, at the time, they had no reason to suspect this at all. Like, Ivy's family and Brittany's family, they never felt that there was a reason for them to worry about the girls being, with Jesse or being at their house. Like, they'd been there several times, had several sleepovers at the house, and it had never been a problem. Additionally, they said they had no idea about Jesse's criminal past. He had never mentioned it, and Holly had never mentioned it to them, which they believed that Holly should have told them about Jesse's past so that they could make an educated decision on whether or not they wanted their kids around him, which I do agree with. I'm not going to victim shame. I'm never the one to do that. But I do think that since Holly knew that he had been in jail, even if she thought that it was a misunderstanding, she should have still offered up this information. That it's what I would want somebody to do for me. This is especially true since Jesse's name wasn't coming up in the Oklahoma registry. Like, since this has happened, they've searched his name several times and his name does not come up. So if the parents were curious about Jesse and had looked him up, they couldn't have found anything out anyway. The only way they would know is if Holly or Jesse told them. Now, though the text from Ivy seemed weird in hindsight, now knowing what had happened, at the time, it didn't. So alarm bells didn't start going off for the parents until that Monday morning. And yes, they were supposed to be home Sunday. The parents were expecting them home Sunday. But the general reaction that their absence got, or rather the lack of action from the families, leads me to believe that them not coming home, this is my opinion or my speculation, that them not coming home that Sunday wasn't that weird of a thing for them to do if they had been together for a weekend. And I'm just putting that together based on the fact that, like, the cops weren't called until the next day. They didn't start freaking out until that Monday. And the fact that, like, I've been a teenage girl who has had a best friend, and if I was to go and stay at her house over a weekend and didn't come home Sunday, that wouldn't be that crazy. Like, that would be something that would totally, like, happen. Only in my situation, it would be a friend coming to my house and staying and not going home, because my mom was always the mom that always had everyone over at our house, not a vice versa. She just loved a busy house when I was younger. There were people in my house constantly. Anyways, it was Monday morning when they really started to worry, because the school bus went by and none of the kids were on it. The reporting I've read said that they saw, like, the bus drove by and they saw that none of the kids were on it. Seems weird that they'd be able to tell that with it just driving by. But either way, they were able to determine that Brittany and Ivy were not on that bus. And not just Brittany and Ivy, there was also no Michael, no Tiffany, and no Rylee on the school bus that morning. So that, in combination with the fact that the girls couldn't be reached, like they tried calling, they tried texting, they got on Facebook, they messaged the girls, they tried video calling, everything. With Brittany's mom, who lived in Texas, but like video chatted with her daughter every weekend, saying that like she could see that her daughter was showing up online, but she wasn't responding to her. So she knew that something was wrong. And for Ivy's family, they had all of that I just mentioned. And also the fact that Ivy's Life 360 app, another Life 360 app, had been turned off. So they knew something was up. So that Monday, May 1st, 2023, an Amber Alert was issued for 14-year-old Ivy Webster and 15-year-old Brittany Brewer. The other kids were not part of this Amber Alert because at the time, they didn't really know they were missing because their mother wasn't alive to be able to report them missing. Descriptions of the girls of Ivy and Brittany went out along with the description of Jesse and the vehicle he was driving. And in the report, it let people know that the girls were last seen with Jesse McFadden. And the missing and at-risk flyer that was released didn't say he was a sex offender, but the photo they used of him was his mugshot. So it gave people the idea that things were not good. And I can only imagine how jarring this was for the families. Because remember, prior to this, they didn't even know he had a record. And now they're seeing that he has a mugshot. So that's happening. And at the same time, in another place, Jesse McFadden is also getting a bench warrant issued against him for missing his court date that morning. So officers, deputies actually go to his house to serve this warrant because like, bro, you're going to jail. You're supposed to go to court. You skipped court. That's not allowed. Shortly after this, another call came into police, and it was a call that let them know that something might seriously be wrong here because it was a call requesting a welfare check for Holly, for Rylee, for Michael, and for Tiffany because nobody had heard from them in days. So that was weird. And I can't say if at this time they were putting all the pieces together, like the girls being missing, Jesse not going to court, now his family being missing. Like all of these pieces are serious, but I don't know if they were put together at this time because, you know, different people are getting the calls and I don't know how well the communication was. But I do know that at some point it was at least being taken seriously because at about 2:30 p.m., police returned to this house and now they were finally going to do a search. They entered the home through an ajar front door. And once they were inside, they found the Henryetta House of Horrors. It was an absolute horrifying sight. And in searching the property, I believe with drones, they discovered 7 dead bodies. These were the bodies of 35-year-old Holly McFadden, 17-year-old Rylee Allen, 15-year-old Michael Mayo, 13-year-old Tiffany Guess, 15-year-old Brittany Brewer, and 14-year-old Ivy Webster. And then the last body was that of 39-year-old Jesse McFadden, who had murdered all these people, all these kids, and then killed himself. Now, the police have said that the bodies of these people were separated, with some of them being found by a creek and some of them being found by a wooded area. The bodies of the 3 teenage girls, which it isn't lost on me that the 3 teenage girls were found separate. This was Rylee, Ivy, and Brittany, and they were found about a quarter mile away from the house, and they weren't all together either. They were separated, but they were near the creek. And then Holly, Michael, Tiffany, and Jesse were found farther away in a wooded area. Autopsy showed that all the victims were killed by gunshot wounds to the head with a 9mm handgun, with Holly and her kids also having abrasions on their bodies. And as for Ivy and Brittany, the 2 teenage girls that were spending the night, they both had blunt force injuries to their lower area that were consistent with exactly what you think they'd be consistent with. It's horrible. Now, police also believe, and this is weird to me, but they believe that there are 2 options here for how the bodies got to where they were. That either they were killed elsewhere, drugged there, and staged, or that they had been running and were chased down and shot. And I find it weird that they're offering up both of these as options because it seems like this would be an easy one to figure out based on like drag marks, blood being in another location if they were killed in another location and moved here. It just seemed weird to me that it said that there was either or being the case, but that is what it says. Now, this was horrifying for people to learn about. The fact that this had happened to so many kids specifically was a lot for people to take in. And it just gets so much worse once police go into that house. Well, no, it gets worse once the family go into the house after the police leave and do their investigation. But before we get into all of that, before we get into what happened, before we get into what police believe happened, what the family believe happened, what was in that house that could point into a direction of what happened, I first want to talk about the people who lost their lives here, right? I want to talk about the kids. I already told you as much as I was able to figure out about Holly, but I want to tell you about her kids, and I want to tell you about Ivy, and I want to tell you about Brittany. And you will see that while I'm talking about them, that there is much more information about Ivy and Brittany out there. I think there's a variety of reasons why that's the case. Bias, for one, because people have negative feelings about Holly, which is reflected on the way people talk about the kids, which is fucking stupid. But also the fact that, Holly was their primary parent. She's the person who would advocate the hardest for them and have the most information about them. And she's not here to do that. Whereas Ivy and Brittany's parents are. And, that's been really hard. This whole thing's been really hard for everyone. And I wanted to talk about Holly's mother specifically and Holly's family. It's been really hard for her to see people villainize her kid. And because of that, not seem to care about her death as much and not seem to care about her kids' deaths as much. Because if you look at it from her point of view, she lost her daughter and all 3 of her grandkids in one fell swoop. And I cannot imagine that pain. The last time she saw her family was just days before they were killed, when she drove 2 hours to see Tiffany sing in her last concert, like choir concert. And she said that everything seemed so normal. And now they're all gone and people are blaming her daughter. And she's like, listen, this man fooled Holly. And she said specifically, quote, "My daughter didn't help him. He killed her and 5 children. So stop digging my daughter. She is a victim as well." She said that she's just as upset as everyone else that the government and the police and like the system at large, the justice system, made it so that Jesse could be free, because she said that if they hadn't done that, she'd still have her daughter and she'd still have her grandkids instead of little urns that she has that she wears around her neck containing all of their ashes that she never takes off. And she said of losing her family, and I quote, "I hurt just like the other families, but he took my world from me, my grandchildren and my daughter. I have a hole in my heart that he created by his actions. Jesse McFadden was a monster for his actions." And so she just asks, that people remember her family as well. So with that, I'm going to try to do just that. I'm going to talk about Rylee, I'm going to talk about Michael, and I'm going to talk about Tiffany. Rylee was Holly's oldest child at 17 years old. She was the artistic child and the alternative kid. She loved to paint, wanting to do that professionally or go a totally different route and be a doctor. Her little brother Michael was just 15 years old and played football, ran cross country and track, and was a, quote, all-around fantastic young man who shared a birthday with his grandfather. Tiffany, who was the youngest, was 13 years old and was also very outgoing, also running track and trying out for the cheerleading team. She also sang for the choir, and she was smart, intuitive, sweet, and loving. Her grandmother said specifically of her, quote, "She was the sweetest, most loving girl you'd ever meet. We called her Tiffosaurus because when she'd get mad at you, she'd growl." Tiffany's father, Joe Guess, the man who, spoke out about these kids, the one who raised these kids and loved these kids as his own, said the greatest days of his life was caring for his children. He said he misses Rylee always wanting to draw something for him and Michael always wanting to show him like a new video game he was playing or like some new engineering project that he had started because he loved to build things. And he said for Tiffany, he just missed that she loved him so much. She was like a huge daddy's girl. And no matter what she was doing, if he was there, she would run and jump in his arms. And dude, this poor guy, he just got such a shit hand here. Not only did he lose everybody, but the day that this happened, he did end up getting a phone call and he was told that 7 victims were found at the property, but that they hadn't been identified. But he ended up figuring it out and putting together who they were, at least who most of the victims were, based on things he saw on the news and on Facebook. Which that is so fucked up. No family member should ever find out about their loved one being killed through the news or through Facebook, especially when it's your kid. And this does happen. I know of a few cases when this has happened, but specifically the one that comes to my mind is Alicia McPhail out of Scotland, where her mother found out that her little baby daughter was killed on Facebook. It's just so fucked. It should never happen like that. But then again, none of this should ever happen, period. But moving forward, let's talk about Brittany and Ivy. Brittany Brewer, Brittany, who had just turned 15 years old, days before her murder, was a student in the Henryetta Middle School, where she was on the honor roll, a member of the school choir, a member of the Schulter Baptist Church, and was very active in the Nazarene youth group. She was also selected to be Miss Henryetta in an upcoming pageant in Tulsa. Brittany was said to be bubbly and outgoing. She was the oldest sister with 2 little sisters and loved kids and animals and wanted to grow up to be a teacher or a vet. She was active in her church and always willing to lend a helping hand, whether it be at home with her family, her father at his work, or through fundraisers with church or school. Her father said specifically of her, quote, "She would have gave the shirt off her back for anybody. She was my sidekick. She was always there." Brittany's father has said that he just feels lost, that for the longest time he expected her to just come home, to walk through that door and just be standing beside him. He also said this is so hard for him because of his other daughters. Like, Brittany was the big sister. She was very close with her little sisters. She was often playing with them, and he just didn't know how he was going to sit down and tell his girls that Brittany was gone. And he said of losing his daughter, and I quote, "It's just a parent's worst nightmare, and I'm living it. She was my right-hand person, and she's gone." Which I truly cannot imagine. I know I say that a lot, but it's like, I can't. My brain doesn't wrap around this happening, even though I read about it happening every fucking day of my life. Now, another girl lost here was Ivy. Ivy Webster was the only daughter who grew up in a house full of boys. She had 4 brothers, which is just so many brothers, and they're all heartbroken knowing that she's never coming home. For a while, even her dog Mavis would sit outside her bedroom door, just knowing that something was not right. Ivy had turned 14 just a week before her murder, having a birthday very close to Brittany's, and she was a typical 14-year-old girl in many ways. Ivy was a student at Henryetta Middle School and loved to play softball and was said to be an outgoing, funny, beautiful, and genuine person. Everything that you'd want your child to be, and everything that Ivy's own mother wished that she, as a person, was. She was said to be the type of kid who just loved, she loved people, she loved animals, especially animals. She even loved bees, which I can relate to. She would try to save bees and even got stung while saving a bee and was really upset that it happened because she just loved them and wanted to help them. Her father said she was just pure good and that the devil took her away from them. The day after Ivy's murder, her father actually went to her school to make an appearance and be there and see her friends. And as I'm sure you can imagine, it was horrifying. That school had just lost so many kids. I cannot even imagine being there after that. And I know that they released a statement just saying that they were doing everything they could to try to do what's best for their students following a tragedy. But it was just what can you do? How do you explain to kids, to middle schoolers, that this kind of thing can happen and that life just goes on? But, her father was there and he went to her locker and he just saw her locker covered in notes from people saying how great she was, what a good friend she was, and how she was the person who was always there for you when you needed her. You know what I mean? If you needed somebody, she was there for you. And now she, like so many others, was gone, murdered for no reason, dude. And it was just so heartbreaking for everybody involved, the family and the friends, and also the other victims of Jesse McFadden. Like Crystal, for example, the girl he had been arrested for violently raping when she was just a child. Crystal has spoken out a bit since this happened, saying that she can't believe that this happened, that she's so sad and she's so mad. She said she felt guilty for not knowing he was out there with the family and that he was around kids, because she would have gone and she would have warned them. And she feels guilty that she didn't do anything, but really there's nothing that she could have done. That's just guilt that she doesn't deserve to carry, but does. She said that when he was going to be released, she begged the DA not to let him out. She said, "Don't let him out. I know he's going to hurt somebody else." But they just kind of told her too bad, so sad. When he hurt you, he was very, very high on meth and he's very sorry. That was what they said when it came to him. And then when he was released, they didn't even contact her to let her know. She said that as soon as she heard that the girls were missing and that they had last been seen with Jesse, she was just hoping and praying that those babies would come home safe. But no, she said she knew deep down that they would not. And it wasn't just her. It wasn't just her who spoke out and had like a lack of resolution. There was also Caitlin, the girl who he was going to trial. He was supposed to go to trial for, doing horrible things to her when she was a child as well. Caitlin, too, has spoken out since the murders and just seems to be crushed because all of this sort of revolves around her, right? Like, he did this to avoid going to trial, or he was going to have to face his crimes that he committed against her. And she never got a chance to face him, to get justice for him exploiting her and manipulating her and controlling her as a child, and then also writing a message to her blaming her for the murders, which I didn't even tell you about yet. It's so fucked up. The night of / before the murders, Caitlin received a message on Facebook, and the message was from Jesse, but it came from another Facebook page, a fake page that was under the name Holly. He really has something with this name Holly. It was a different last name. It wasn't his wife's page. It wasn't his ex-girlfriend Holly's page from forever ago. It was with a different name. And the messages he wrote to her are absolutely chilling. He said to her, and I quote, "I did exactly what I promised I would do when I got out. I got a marketing job, making great money, and was being advanced. Been there 2 years now, and made a great life like I promised I would do with you. Now it's all gone. I told you I wouldn't go back. This is all on you for continuing this." At the time she received this message, she had no idea what he was talking about. She didn't know what he'd done or what he was planning to do, but she knew that it was weird. So she took a screenshot of it and she sent it to the DA. And then the next day she wakes up and she finds out that he's missing and these 2 girls are missing, and she goes into panic mode. She freaks out and she actually gets an Airbnb an hour away because she's worried that he's going to come after her. So he reaches out to Caitlin. He says all this, but Caitlin isn't the only person he reaches out to that evening. He also reaches out to his mother, LaDonna. Now, I guess they were able to figure this out because they got a search warrant, and they found that on April 30th, he had called his mother, and he told his mother he wasn't going back to jail and he was going to take his own life. Now, she talks to him, and she must have believed that she had talked him down because she hangs up and she doesn't do anything, right? Nothing was done after taking this phone call. Now, some people wonder if there is a reason that nothing happened because his mother was reportedly an employee for the Pittsburgh County Courthouse where Jesse was released from prison early. But that's just something that some people are wondering. Could mean nothing, could mean everything. We don't know. But Jesse's mother said of this conversation, and I quote, "My heart is breaking for the victims. I don't understand it. I never ever would have expected anything like this." But back to Caitlin. Caitlin has said that these murders are 100% a result of a failure in the justice system and that they could have been avoided. She pointed out, it is correct in saying that there are so many times that it could have been avoided. Like, they could have kept him in jail the entire time instead of releasing him early on good behavior. They could have moved forward with the case that was filed against him in relation to her instead of putting it off year after year after year, giving him the opportunity to be free. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "They could have prevented these deaths. This never should have happened. I don't know how many times I told them, he's a dangerous man. You're putting little girls in danger. I don't know how many times I screamed at the top of my lungs for someone to care. Now, look at what happened." And what happened is several families have been demolished. Okay? All these kids are dead. And now 2 families have put up gardens in their backyards in memory of their murdered daughters so that they have something to live on in their memory since they themselves are not actually alive. So now, the investigation, because you would think that even though police knew that Jesse did it and he was dead, they may want to look further into this to figure out, what happened exactly and why. But police didn't really seem to think they needed to do that. Once discovering the scene, local police did their investigation, right? They taped off the property, they did their searches, they collected evidence, and once they were satisfied that everything was complete, they released a statement saying that there was no evidence to point to a motive for these murders, adding that even if they could, normal, loving people could never understand. Anyways, okay? The property was then released, and whoever wanted could come and go as they pleased. Not whoever wanted, obviously. Like, strangers aren't allowed to just go inside somebody's house, but like the landlord, the owner, the families, they were allowed to just go in. And that is exactly what happened. Members of Holly's family and the kids' family spoke to the landlord and got permission to enter to go in and get some of their things. They went along with Ivy's family, who wanted to go to look for some of her things as well, like her cell phone, for example, because police said that they only found 2 cell phones in the house and neither of them were Ivy's, which is a funny thing to say considering later, when they realized all the evidence they left behind, they found 32 cell phones in this house. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Once they were inside this house, what they found, what police didn't collect as evidence, absolutely pointed exactly to what the motive was in this situation. And it is so wild that all of this was left behind for the families to find because police didn't think it was important. And again, it all pointed towards the motive that police said they couldn't figure out. Inside, they found several electronics that weren't collected, including Ivy's cell phone, which was tucked away in a cabinet. They also found sex and bondage devices. In the bedroom, there were restraints that were bolted into the walls low by the mattresses and books on witchcraft and spells, which I don't know if the books matter. They probably don't, but it was mentioned. In the kitchen, they found another restraint with chains and locks still attached. And in that room, there was also drug residue, syringes, more bondage devices, and lube. And much of this was purchased for this express purpose. It was purchased for this date because Ivy's dad found a Walmart receipt in a bag, I think, and it was dated like the day before or like a few days before, very recently, and it had the items that were in the house, like the locks, for example, on this receipt. I just referred to my notes. It was the day before. So he purchased this stuff for this purpose. And for whatever reason, all of this was left in the house. All of it. All of it. Imagine being this family. You walk into this house to look for some of your dead family member stuff, and you see restraints strapped into the wall by the mattresses on the floor and freaking dildos and lube and shit everywhere. Holy shit. So the family goes in, they find this, they start taking photos and they start taking videos because Ivy's grandma was actually like, oh shit, look at all of this. We should record that we're in here and show that we're not touching shit and show everything there is. So they do that. They go outside. They call the freaking family attorney and they get the advice that they should call the police back and tell them to come back out and get the stuff. So they do that. They call the police and they're like, hey, why don't you come get all this evidence, my guy? Hello? It's just insane. And if you go online, you can actually see the video of the family walking through this house and all the things that they're finding. It's all recorded. And it just flabbergasts me. I am perplexed at the fact that police didn't think any of this was important and said they couldn't figure out the motive. Hello? Hello? It just makes no sense at all. But you do get an idea of why the police didn't collect this and why they didn't think it was important to collect this when they come back to finally collect it after the family complains. So they finally come back, they start collecting evidence, taking photos, etc., etc. And you do see this on video as well. And Ivy's father, Justin, is there. And he's talking to this guy. And he's talking to him very polite at first, considering how fucking frustrated he had to have been. And he's like, listen, I know that this must be hard for you guys too. I know you're hurting. I know you have a hell of a job. I know that you saw my daughter in that condition. You saw her dead. You saw her shot in the head. But like, you guys missed so much. I need you guys to take this stuff. And as he talked to this guy, I don't know if he was a cop or if he was a tech or what, but the guy was incredibly dismissive. And you could tell that his dismissiveness was very, very frustrating for Justin. And he went from polite to just upset. You could just see that he's like, wow, you really just like don't give a shit. He tells this tech or this cop, like, listen, I know Jesse is dead and that he can't answer for why he did what he did, but that doesn't mean that you, as the police, can't do your job and figure out why it happened. And he tells them, like, the police messed up here. There were serious problems and the world is going to know now. Because again, they recorded it. They recorded the walkthrough. They recorded all the evidence being found that was left behind. And this cop or tech just turns to him and he's like, okay, but like, what does it like matter? What is this going to accomplish? And this is when you can tell that Justin is just losing it. And he says to him, quote, I'm a grieving parent whose daughter got raped and murdered. And you're telling me right now that I don't have the right to know what happened? The story's right here. It's right here. And he said all this while pointing to all this evidence that was left behind. Which is like, yeah, dude, you don't think there's anything to accomplish here? You don't think there's anything valuable that can come out of looking at this stuff? What about the several computers that were left behind? What about the several cell phones? You don't think it's important to look in there? See if you could figure out why he did what he did? See if you could find potential multiple perpetrators, potential multiple victims, other victims that could be related to Jesse, since we know that he was a monster. Look at this house. Like, this is a lot for a one-time occurrence. And also, like, what if there are photos in there of these victims prior to them being killed? Like, there's so much that you could look at and figure out, but you didn't even try. Ivy's family has said that, like, no words can describe the fear that they feel, because they have an idea in their head that it's possible that Jesse could have recorded the assault against their daughter, and that this could be out on the dark web, because they don't know, is the point. They don't know what he was doing. They don't know who he knew, who he was in contact with. What they do know is that he was a monster who was capable of anything, and that the people who were in the position of power to actually help them didn't seem to give a shit. And it wasn't just Ivy's family who saw all of this, by the way. A family member of Holly's, her name was Lynn. She went to the house after the murders to remove Holly and the kids' stuff, after she received word from the landlord that they had just 3 days to go and remove all the stuff, or it was going to get like trashed, which is a whole other thing that I'm not even going to get into. But she said when she went into this house, she saw things that made her feel like she can never trust the police again. She said she'll never feel safe and secure in their presence again. And this was the type of thing that prior to this, she never questioned. And she said of this quote, "I found a tremendous amount of evidence in a house that the police searched several times. After they released the house twice, how could this be? That house is very small. No person on earth should have witnessed what I did. When I turned the evidence over to the police, they weren't grateful. Nope, they were somewhat bothered, let's just say." She continued, quote, "I don't understand how that house wasn't sealed. Every inch searched for any evidence to help us learn how sick, perverted men like Jesse McFadden think and operate. The opportunity missed here could affect thousands of future children. In a time and age when sex trafficking is at an all-time high, you would think law enforcement would take every opportunity to learn everything they can to protect our children. Law enforcement here in Henryetta, Oklahoma, have failed the victims and future victims." She even said that when she pulled out a dresser, she found that there were restraints behind the dresser, and that these restraints were different from the other restraints they had found in other places of the house. So she went to an officer who was there with her while she was looking and asked, like, "Do you want these?" And they were like, "It's not an active crime scene, so you can either keep them or throw them away." And another thing that she found, or Ivy's mother found, it's reported both ways that both women found it, and I think both women have said that they found it, but either way, another thing that was found was a ledger. And this ledger was something that people were really grasping onto and found to be very important, but it does seem like it was kind of misrepresented in like reporting. But basically it was a ledger that had names on it, and then next to the names were either like birthdays or numbers of some sort. So this was found and this was turned into police. Now, I don't want to get too far into the ledger because, again, it seems like there's been some misinformation spread about it, and I don't know exactly what's true, but I do know that it's being looked into right now, because on it were some of the names of the victims along with other people's names. So people were like, hello, who are these other people? Are these people alive? Are they being looked into? What's the situation? And it looks like it is being looked into. It's just something we don't know about totally yet, because it is like a new case and this will take time. And it is being looked into, but it's not being looked into by the local police. As I'm sure you can imagine, due to the mishandling and the back and forth between the local police and the family and everything left behind, they ended up being taken off the case. And now the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigations has taken over, and it seems to be going a lot more smoothly now, with the family saying they're doing a much better job with the case. So we will see what shakes out here, if there is anything else. But with everything they found in that house, the electronics and the bondage and all the things they found, what can come out can only be bad. But the families that do at least deserve to know what happened here. And in the meantime, they're working to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else, to any other children. Ivy Webster's family specifically has been incredibly vocal about their fight for justice and also for change, with Ivy's father saying that he feels her behind him, guiding him, telling him to keep going. He, like many others, said that from the very beginning, and is still saying that the local police completely failed in handling this case multiple times. And not just when handling this case, but when Jesse McFadden was released prior to these murders even being taken place. He said that Jesse McFadden should have never had the opportunity for freedom, a freedom that he used to kill his child. And he says that he never should have had the opportunity for freedom because he freaking raped a child. You know what I mean? He ruined her life, and he ruined it to the point that it can never be the same. And he has said, and I agree, that for what he did to Crystal, he should have been in jail for life, that sexual predators like that cannot be rehabilitated and therefore should not be released. And he said specifically of this, and I quote, "Every sexual offense, especially for a minor, should be a capital punishment. You should be put to death or rot in prison the rest of your life. That's what I want. That's what we want. That's what America wants. This can't happen again. We can't have any more of this." And that's why they're trying to change the laws to stop this from happening to anyone else. Basically, he and his family have drafted up a petition to create something called the Knight's Law, which would basically change the way sex offenders are handled in the legal system. He was asking for change in sentencing and probationary requirements. He was also demanding more funding for law enforcement so that they had the resources to stop people like Jesse, and potentially so that they had the funds to investigate his daughter's murder more thoroughly. He basically said that offenders like him should not be able to get out after serving 85% of their sentence, that, again, they cannot be rehabilitated, so their good behavior does not matter, and they especially should not be released if there are new charges pending against them. So this law would be called the Knight's Law, like Knight, and that's because the Knight was the mascot at the school that all the kids attended. And he named it the Knight's Law deliberately, where we see it often where you name it after a specific person. He didn't name it Ivy's Law because he said it wasn't just his daughter. She wasn't the only victim. He was naming it after all the victims and all the future victims that they could be helping with this new law. So this proposal actually did get passed by the Oklahoma House this year in March of 2024. So now it's just up to going through the Senate. I don't really understand how laws work. So if that didn't make sense, please correct me, but that is what I read. Now I'm curious, do you agree with what they're trying to work towards? Like, can you see a scenario where that would be unfair? I'm going to try my hardest. And if I don't, remind me. I'm going to try my hardest to link the active GoFundMes, because some of them are, some of them are not. And the petition for the Knights 2.0 petition, the Knights 2.0 petition down below, so you can read everything that they're trying to do, because I just gave you some bullet points, but it is long. There's a lot that they are trying to accomplish. They have a lot that they want to change, and I can see why, because what do you do with that? What do you do with those feelings that you have inside of you in knowing that your child's gone and knowing that you lost them in the way that you did? And there's nothing you can do to change that. It just is that forever. And like, why? Why? When asked why they think he did what he did, Ivy's parents have said that they just think that he is an evil person and that he was mad at the system and mad at the world, so he wanted to take it out on other people. He chose to do it when their two girls were sleeping over and reportedly tried to get even more girls there because he just wanted to take out as many people as possible. And you know what? That does ring true to me, and it's horrifying. This is my nightmare. This is my nightmare situation, because I haven't talked about this much on this channel because I don't get into a lot of personal things. Like, you guys get a little bit here and there, but like, it's not about me, right? So I don't talk about me that much. But me and my husband have decided long ago, and of course, like, we're not in the situation yet, so who knows if it'll happen, things change. But we talked about it when Charlie was born, that like, we're not going to do sleepovers because we think that in general, there's a lot of danger in that. And of course, this case is so much more than just sleepovers. It's more than just that. But when I first heard about this case, I just remember my heart dropping. Because again, this is my worst nightmare. And this is the type of story that I think you need to tell. Not just because of what happened, because of why it happened. And also just so that parents can know and be prepared and be vigilant. Ever since her murder, Ivy Webster's parents have been working very hard to get the story out there, to let people know what happened and to let people know about all the failures that happened in our justice system so that their state and other states can take steps towards protecting children. And that is one of the main reasons I'm making this video, to help spread that word. Because nobody expects, right? Nobody expects that their government is going to release a predator out into the world, right? You don't think that's going to happen, but sometimes it does. You never expect a monster to be right next door, but sometimes he is. And with that, my friends, is the story of the Henryetta House of Horrors. I hope you found this telling to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Holly, Rylee, Michael, Tiffany, Ivy, and Brittany with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day. And this is it. Do you think that there are any other victims that could be linked to Jesse McFadden that we just don't know about yet? Do you think that when they go through his computers and they go through the phones and they look at this ledger, that they're going to be able to link him to other crimes? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I am curious to hear what you think. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on the list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out, just like in this case. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of, or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 weeks, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with the link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.